Hello, beautiful people, and a warm welcome to the Surrey Art School studio as we prepare to embark on cycle 1 of our summer theme, Insectarium. So for those of you that are new to Sketchbook Club, welcome to the community. It is so wonderful to have you here learning alongside us. And just a reminder that if you're on the Light subscription, you're more than welcome to join the free Surrey Artists group on Facebook, where you can share your work and get a little bit of feedback from other people in the community and occasionally from me. And for those of you that are on the community subscription, you have access to our private online community on Facebook, where you can share with loads of other like-minded people, and you will get regular feedback from me on your work, as well as tips and advice. So this community is built on sharing, and I know that when you're beginning a creative journey, sometimes that can be a little bit daunting, but I can promise you that if you are brave enough to share some of your work with other people in the community, not only will you inspire other people with your work, but you'll gain access to such valuable feedback about your work, which will really help you to grow. So I just wanted to encourage you there, if you can, to try and share as much as you can of your journey this summer with us. And again, I'm also on Instagram, so if you tag me at Surrey Art School, or if you hashtag at Surrey Art School, and if you hashtag Insectarium, I'll also be able to see your work. And I absolutely love to see your work. It's one of the sort of bugbears sometimes for me of teaching online, is that I don't get enough access to the work that you're creating as you go along, and I would really, really love to help and support you on your journey. So I just wanted to say that first before I say anything else about the theme. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're amongst like-minded people here, so many people beginning their journey this season. You are not alone, and I want you to feel supported on this journey. So I'm just going to speak briefly about Insectarium today. We are kicking off with some snail studies, and I share some really useful tips on how to draw from observation today, how to draw different sketching techniques, sort of light, loose sketching techniques, how to approach a sketch or a drawing as a sort of working document where we slowly but surely whittle down from a general shape to a particular shape. I also talk about measuring and talk about angles today. So today is very much a sketching, a sort of reminder of sketching techniques, which will be really useful to you for later parts of the project. And in terms of materials for that, all you need is a 2B or a 3B pencil, and ideally a blender. If you don't have a blender, well, I do really recommend investing in one, but you can sort of blend with your finger as well. It's just a little bit less precise. Or if you just roll up a little bit of kitchen towel into a point, you can sort of use that to blend. But I do recommend getting either some blenders or a tortillon. It would be really, really useful for this cycle. So we begin, like I said, looking at some sketching techniques. We then look at layers of observation beyond that. So we look at tonal values, and then finally we look at fine lines and details. So for most of this episode, we'll just be looking at how you sketch a snail, how you sketch some shells from different angles, and then how you work on the body of the snail as well. And then as we progress into cycle 2, we'll look at some wet materials for that as well. So I'm stretching out this first cycle of the season to cover 2 cycles actually, so that we can get involved in some inks and some watercolour in cycle 2 as well. So as well as all those sketching techniques, I also talk you through how to set up your sketchbook for the season ahead, a little bit on sort of things that I like to do in my sketchbook. And I am recommending for this cycle that you work with our octopus sketchbooks. It's a really, really nice one for sort of nature journaling in this way. So there's a few tips and techniques there on how to get started on the project as well, working with some of the information that we would have sent you in the little postcard on the subscription box, and sort of starting to think about how we lay things out on a page and how we use this again as like a working document for research. So all that coming up in cycle 1. I really have enjoyed putting this first cycle of the season together for you, and I really hope that you enjoy it too. And just a reminder, as I said, to connect with us as a community. Whether you're a light or a community subscriber, you'll find this journey so much more beneficial if you connect with other learners online and sort of have access to that support and that feedback, which is always available to you. Okay, so I'm really looking forward to getting started with you. I really hope you enjoy this first cycle of the season, or cycle of the season, if you speak in Snail, which I've been doing a lot in my mind lately. First cycle of the season, sketching snail shells and sketching snails in general. I really hope you enjoy it, and I shall see you back in 2 weeks' time for cycle 2 of this spring summer season of Sketchbook Club. So much love. Okay, my love, so I just wanted to start by running through the items that we sent you in your subscription box and talking a little bit about how you get your sketchbook set up for the project. So as you know, if you got the subscription box, we'd have sent you a little seasonal postcard, and on the back is some information including slugs and snails, which is where we're going to kick off our journey into this beautiful world of land invertebrates today. So with this postcard, you're welcome to sort of copy down some of the information there and make yourself a title page with the name of the project theme. And I actually like to stick the postcard itself to my sketchbook because it just makes it really easy for me to find the different projects when I'm looking for them afterwards. So this is an octopus sketchbook, and this is actually my sketchbook from the autumn season's migration theme, but I have a load of space in it because I ended up working out of sketchbook afterwards. So I thought I'd use that up this season. And the beauty of these octopus sketchbooks is that you have these sort of fold out pages. So for each page, you actually end up with sort of 3 or 4 pages of space that you can work on, and it's double-sided. So you can work on both sides. So that means I've got plenty of space to kick off my project here. So that's just a little note on sort of how to get started and what kind of sketchbook I recommend. As well as that, we sent you some cold brew tea. And just to explain, this is just a little pyramid, and you can pop it straight into your water bottle. So it's a really nice summery vibe tea that we thought would really suit the season. And this is plant-based packaging as well, so it's biodegradable in case you thought we'd been sending out plastic in the post, which is really not our style. And as well as that, we sent you a couple of sheets of this really lovely rough Fabriano watercolour paper. This roughness is going to become really useful to us when we are painting our slugs and snails a little bit later on. So hang on to that. It's a really nice sample, and it could be used to create maybe one or a series of studies if you cut it in half. So you've got 2 nice chunky sheets of that in your subscription box. You've also got a lovely 0.5 sepia toned fine liner. We imagined you'd already have a black fine liner, so we thought send you a sepia tone. Again, it'd be really useful for slugs. And then as well as that, we also send you a little sample of paints. And if you look just behind the paints, you'll find the names of the colours, and they should sort of reference the grid that we've got going on here in terms of those colours. So this middle colour, interference green, is actually a glaze, and we're going to use it a little bit later on in the season for iridescent sort of shimmer on our bugs. But otherwise, you've got undersea green and sap green, which is just perfect sort of gardeny, this time of the year green tones, and also some burnt umber because you're going to need a little bit of brown in your palette, and then finally some shadow violet, which is much more useful for things like some more translucent things like wings. So just to let you know, this one's a little, rather than a sort of paint, it's more of like a tint, I suppose. And one of the first things you may want to do is just get those colours out and get them down onto paper so you can get a sense of what those colours are. And in order to do that, you just need to wake up the paint because it'll have had some time to dry off so that we can send it to you. So all you need to do is take a brush and drop a little bit of water onto each of those dots just to wake them up. I'm just going to start with the greens. Now, I know many of you will be really familiar with these colours, but if you're not familiar with them, you're in for a real treat here. They are really beautiful tones. So just wake up the paint first, and this is watercolour paper, so it should hold your paint really, really well. And then once you've got the paint awoken, you can then create some samples in your book. So I might actually put a bit of this undersea green as a little sort of title space. It's a really, really beautiful tone. So I can write the title theme on top of it. I really quite like using watercolours as sort of highlighting tools in my sketchbook. So yeah, and you can get out the rest of them maybe on a sort of separate portion of the page, or just do like a little strip of each, and just make a note of those colours, so you get an idea of what they look like and how they perform on paper, and that'll be really useful for when you're using them later on in the season as well. So this burnt umber is quite a warm reddish brown. I'm going to put down a little sample of that. And then this, the shadow violet, the last one, it sort of looks like a grey, but it has some incredible tones within it, as many of you will know if you have been following the sketchbook journey for many years. It's a really, really beautiful colour and really, really worth having in your palette. So there we go. And this last one, this interference green, yes, it is interference green. If you get a dark tone like the undersea green here, and you just pop a little sample of that down, when that's dry, you can then add a little glaze of the interference green over the top, and you'll get a full idea of that sort of, that tone, that's the tone and the colour of it basically. So it doesn't really work as a standalone paint. It's really good as a glaze on top of other paints, especially much darker paints. It will really, really show up there. So that's a little starting exercise that you can do, perhaps just to write the title Insectarium, to add a few bug facts across the top, or a little bit about what the project means to you, and then to just note down the colours in the subscription box and their names, so that you've got that for reference later on in the project. Okay, so we're going to get cracking without cracking. We're going to get cracking on some snail studies now. I'm going to introduce you to a couple of different types of snails that we'll be looking at during this first cycle of the season, and that's what we'll be doing next. Okay, but for now, just wanted to run through very quickly what was in the box, so you get an idea of what we sent you and why. Okay. Okay, so just a quick note for those of you joining us for the first time, or who haven't done a project with us before. I just wanted to show you my first page. You know, these pages are not about having the most incredibly beautiful studies. Of course, you're welcome to do that, but they are about sort of getting information down in a fun way. So you saw I did some testing on the paints, but I've also made some notes on snails, because those are the that's going to be the subject of our first cycle. Sorry, I'm still a little bit slow with my words. And just wanted to show you some of the highlighting I've done of some of that information, which really helps me to remember it. So if you use something like your 0.5 fine liner that we sent you to write with in your sketchbook, it's waterproof, so it means you can then go over and highlight different bits of information. And I like to have a bit of fun. I always have loads of leftover little samples of Daniel Smith paint from previous projects, so I like to use that as a highlighting tool. You'll be amazed at how much you get out of this little sample of paints that we send you. And I just wanted to talk quickly about snail anatomy, because I'm not going to go into it in depth, but I do find it really fascinating, and I know some of you will really want to sink your teeth into this, into the technical aspects of a snail. So you'll find on the resources some little images of snail anatomy, and obviously we haven't started sketching yet, so if you want a quick technique for just getting that shape of the snail down onto your sketchbook, I highly recommend using carbon paper. I use it quite a lot in my sketchbooks, especially just if I want to do diagrams and things like that. So what I've done in this page is just to trace down this image here using my carbon paper. So just popping the carbon paper behind, image on top, and trace around the edge of it. And then that just gives me a nice little diagram, which I can decorate it if I want to. I've used a little bit of the sap green and the undersea green just to do some grass around him. And I just played around with some initial colour mixing to find the colours, and that's a really nice activity for you guys to do anyway, so I won't give you any pointers necessarily on that. I want you to be a bit exploratory with the colours that we've sent you, but also making sure that you've got just a basic pan palette of colours to hand. And you know, all the colours in my snail anatomy study I mixed just by using this yellow ochre, adding a little bit of red and a little bit of blue to it, just to get a slightly deeper, richer, greenier brown. But this sketchbook is a chance for you to play with material materials, and you're welcome to use things like carbon paper in order to just get the imagery down so that you can then do the fun stuff, which I think is labeling your diagram and all the rest. And I've just gone for a very simple sort of external view, but there is a whole sort of under the shell anatomy of the snail, which I know that some of you will really enjoy sinking your teeth into. So just wanted to offer that up for anyone who hasn't sort of learned with me before. The sort of there's no rules to Sketchbook Club in terms of how you get that information down on the page. I just want you to have fun with it, to enjoy it. Allow yourself to engage that inner child when it comes to filling your sketchbooks, and put a bit of colour in it, add a bit of joy to your pages as you go along. Okay, so I'm going to run through some snail sketching techniques now. I'm not actually going to sketch in my sketchbook because I want a little bit more space just to show you the technique, but all you need to do is to meet me back here with a 2B pencil, a sheet of paper, or if you want you can go straight into your sketchbook. It's up to you. I just need a bit more space, and maybe a fine liner. If you've got a black fine liner or your brown fine liner to hand, that might come in handy for this initial snail sketching that we're going to do. Okay. Okay, my loves, so let's make a start with some snail shell sketching. It's taken me a little while to wrap my mouth around that. So I am sketching on a slightly larger sheet of paper here. This is watercolour paper, but you don't need to worry about that. The reason why I'm sketching on a larger sheet of paper is because I really want to enlarge these, and I need a little bit of space for my sketching as well. You can just sketch straight into your sketchbooks, but you may find that you're working a lot from your fingers and your wrists, and we don't want to do that for this. We want looseness and we want movement. So you can always sketch on larger paper, then chop it down and stick it in your sketchbook afterwards. Or if you're really confident or you've got a big sketchbook, go straight into that. That's completely up to you. So you will see that I've got some snail shell samples here. I've just been out in the garden and I've collected a few little samples. These are sort of collection that I've had over the years, to be honest, but I know this really is snail season now. One of the benefits of it being so damp is that there are a lot of snails around. So you should be able to, if you look in a sort of damp corner, find yourself a couple of actual snail shells. These are just regular garden snails that we're going to look at today. And the reason why it's so beneficial to have a physical sample is that we can look really closely, and close observation is how we get really good drawings. It's not about being amazing at drawing, it's about being amazing at noticing things like where the light hits, where the shadow lands, and then some of the finer details, so some of the finer lines that we see, some of the textures on the surface, but also some of the different tonal variations that we see. Plus you can sort of turn it around, have a good look inside, and you can look at your snail from different angles. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in my snail observation so far is that when we are sketching snails, we tend to sort of look at them as being sort of directly from the side like that, or directly from the side like this. But what I've noticed with the snails that I've been observing is actually when the snail is moving along, the shell tends to be a little bit tilted like that. So actually, in terms of our sketching, it's important that we sketch from different angles, because if we want a true sort of rendition of our snails slithering along, then it actually needs, we actually need to tilt the shell up so slightly to make it more realistic. So a little bit of snail observation goes a long way here, I think you'll find. So I'm going to show you some basic technique for sketching to begin with, and it's just coming back to those ellipses, and if you don't know my techniques for sketching sort of soft round shapes like this, then just pay attention for a moment as I sort of run through it. So I've got a 3B pencil, or a 2B pencil is fine as well, nice and sharp, and it's just going to relax and lay down into my hand like this. So I'm just gripping it just with these front two fingers. So nice relaxed hold on the pencil, and my hand is anchored down to the page. That's really, really important. It's not up here, it's not wiggling around, it's laying down on its side, and that allows me, I don't know if you can hear that sound, but it allows a little bit of traction with the paper, which slows things down and allows me to be in sort of much more control. Now you'll also notice that as I'm moving my hand, there is no movement whatsoever in my fingers. And there's no movement whatsoever in my wrist. All of the movement is coming from my elbow. and from my shoulder up here, which you cannot see, but you'll get the feel for it as you do this. So in order to sketch a nice loose ellipse, I've got my pencil nice and relaxed, and you can hold it a little bit further down as well. That will help you relax rather than holding it here. We're not writing, we're drawing, so it's a different pencil grip, okay? So lean back a little bit, and then we're just going to sketch really loosely a sort of circular shape. And this is not the perfect snail shell shape, but it is just a shape to help our minds to find the true shape, if that makes sense. So here I am with my lovely snail shell, which I will try and hold up and get into focus for you. There we go. And then just down here on the page, I'm just sketching really loosely to begin with. I'm going to press a little bit harder so you can see. Just finding that sort of whole soft circular shape. So it looks a bit like this, and it's okay to have lots and lots of scribbles in there, okay, just to be clear. Once I've got that in, then I can start to sort of look for the true shape. So down here at this end, I can sort of find, and again, this is where finger marks come in. This is where I can sort of find from that whole shape, I can sort of pull down and find that top spiral shape, which curves off a little bit as it works its way towards the spiral. So I'm just curving off there. And then as I work my way back, using those ellipses to help me find the back of the snail shell and that area that then meets up with the spiral, okay? So this is what it's looking like now compared to just that big scribble there, and we're slowly but surely cutting it away. And so then from there I can continue to sort of reshape and find the true shape of my shell. So at this point, once you've got that shape in and you're happy with it, then you can take away some of the other sketchy lines, because they will start to sort of confuse our brains rather than help them. So I'm just going to do that quickly with my rubber. Okay, so looking more snail shelly now. And now we need to find that spiral. Now you might find it easier to work your way backwards on this, but one of the things you do need to do is pay attention to how many spirals there are. So I've got a center here, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, okay? So from this little middle point, or backwards if you like, we'll try backwards. We can work our way backwards. And we're trying to keep sort of some kind of evenness in that distance between the different parts of the spiral, okay? We're not machines, we are only human. This is not a photocopy, so it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but just some mindful awareness of the spacing between those swirls is going to really help to get something that looks like a realistic snail shell. So you can try both ways. I actually found it much easier to reverse than I did when I was trying to sketch these in a forwards motion before. But you find what is easier for you. And there we have a sort of more accurate, it's got a little bit of work to be done on it. There's a little bit of a point here at the top, but a slightly more accurate version of the snail shell that's in front of me. So I recommend having a few attempts at that, rerunning through that exercise a few times, just looking at the same type of snail shell is going to be really helpful, the same image off of the resources, and just getting familiar with that shape to begin with. We're not even worrying just yet about what's in the snail shell, okay? Just trying to find that shape and get familiar with it. And once you've had a go at that particular angle, you could perhaps start to shift up the angle a little bit. So, oops, this angle is really interesting to draw from here, I think, where you can see the sort of spiral bulging out, and then you've got this hole, this opening, sort of where the snail would actually, its body would be coming out of. I think that bit's called the mantle. But you have to refer back to your your snail anatomy for that one. So if I just hold this like this, in terms of sketching, what I would want to do is put a line, like a central line down the middle, so that I don't lose that sort of central axis. So that would look like this. And again, look, my fingers aren't moving. Everything is happening from that sort of bend at the wrist with this. Okay, and then we can still add in those ellipses. So we'll put one here, second swirl here, and then this third quite meaty, chunky swirl here. That gives us the loose shape, and then once we've got that, we can start to connect these shapes together. This one's actually quite shallow, so I'm going to sort of de-accentuate the sketch that I already did. And then this next one, gosh, quite hard to hold these. This next one bulging out from the side and then coming all the way across. So again, the lines are just there as a guideline, all right? And then it swirls back on itself here. So this one's a little bit more complex. It might take a little bit longer, but do have a look at my notes, my guidelines on the resources. And then equally on the other side, and you can check the distance there to make sure that it's bulging out correctly on each side. This edge here is going to come back down to join this one. Okay, so we end up with this like little swirly shape here. And then on the other side, it bulges out in quite a strange way, in a way that you sort of wouldn't almost expect. So I can see the edge of the snail shell there, of that next swirl. And then this comes out at quite an angle from here to create that little space where the snail's body would pop out. Okay? So these are all good exercises to do. Don't be afraid to try sketching from different angles. This line down the center is really going to help you here. You could also put another line across if that helps, because that will show you where that edge is coming out, where that edge of this little opening is appearing, and it's just quite a nice, satisfying thing to sketch for your sketchbooks, I think. So play around with different angles here. One last angle is sort of this angle here. So we've actually got quite a wide shape here, and then those quite thin, quite sort of, not thin, what am I trying to say? Sort of, they don't stick out too much is what I'm trying to say, if you know what I mean by that. So with this one, we've actually got a sort of curve at the top, sort of coming fairly straight down. We've got a curve here at the bottom. That's where the entrance to the snail shell is. And then we've got these little soft swirl shapes sort of coming off from the side quite subtly. So again, you can make it like a little Michelin man to begin with. And then when you're happy with it, you can start to join those edges. So this observational drawing not only gives us an understanding of what the snail looks like from different angles, which is going to be really helpful later on, but each time you do a sketch, you're increasing those layers of observation as well, so you're noticing more. I'm seeing here, for example, that there's like a band that goes through the middle of this last swirl, and it sort of goes off at a bit of an angle. So that will help me to show the 3D-ness of this little snail shell. It would be sort of coming from here and then heading off in that direction. So all very interesting and useful observations. So have a go, do a few sketches, and then meet me back here and we'll look at that next layer of observation, which will be light and shadow. Okay? Okay, so there's a couple more layers to this drawing in order to make it look less flat, less like a line drawing like this, and a little bit more 3D. And the second layer is tone. The third layer is mark making, by the way, or texture. But in order to sort of prepare ourselves for doing things like, say, watercolor studies or ink studies, understanding the tonal values on this little shell are going to be really helpful. Now, I will put a black and white image of this on the resources if you struggle to sort of identify a full tonal scale. But I wanted to talk about tools for tone first. And again, I've got a 3B pencil here, but a 2B pencil is fine for that as well. And one way of adding tone is just to work simply with the pencil. I've also got a little pencil blender here, which is very, very useful for subtly blending out tones from darkest to lightest. And I've also got a paper towel and a graphite stick. So there are a few different ways of creating tone. Some of you will be familiar with these, but I wanted to run back over them anyway. So as I said, the first way of creating tone is to hold your pencil on its side like this. So not like this, but rather sort of so that it's flat with the page, and just to rub your pencil very lightly on the page. So dropping some pencil onto the page. And if you press heavily, you'll get a darker tone. And if you press lightly, you'll get a lighter tone. So you get the idea there in terms of tone. And then in order to sort of soften that off, because at the moment you can see it's creating like a texture on the page, something like a pastel blender can be really helpful. And you can blend in a sort of circular motion so that we don't get lines. And that will push the pencil into the tooth of the paper and allow you to create really, really subtle tonal values. So if I keep pulling that graphite across the page, I can get towards incredibly light tones at the end of that pull. Okay, so that's one way of creating tone. It's a little bit more laborious, but it is a really valid way of working. And then if you want a really quick sort of blanket of tone, then you can take something like a graphite stick. This is a 6B graphite stick. Shave it onto the page. And then use just a paper towel to softly blend. So again, it's just paper like the blending stump, paper and paper with a graphite in between, soft blend. And I've already created like a little snail shell shape there, which I can then, let's get rid of the excess, which I can then come and reshape with a rubber. So just running back over some of these sort of formal elements, I suppose, these formal ways of creating a drawing, and see how quickly I can find, just even if I do this quite rough and quite loosely, I can find that sort of snail shell shape. Now from there you are going to have to lift out to create some highlights. That's the sort of mid-tone that's gone down, but then when we get to things like the spiral on the snail shell, you'll notice that there is a darker area of tone that comes sort of between, it's very hard to explain in words, come on Ellie. So you'll see a dark area just where the ridge is, or the sort of furrow actually, sorry, of the spiral, and then a lighter area, and then it'll get darker again. So it's just noticing that it's dark to mid to very light to dark to mid to very light. So there's a very light bit just before a very dark bit. And that's how we are able to see things. So we've already put in a bit of that dark, so we just need to add a bit of mid-tone to that with our drawing. So either, or I'll do it on this one actually, just because it's a little bit easier for you to see, because we've already got that mid-tone in. So I'm coming along now with my pencil, following the edge of that furrow. You could sketch this more heavily first. I'm putting in that darker tone around the ridge, and then I'm just sort of blending it towards the lighter areas. And at some stage you may see a highlight. So where you see the highlight, you're going to remove completely. Or if you want to lighten up an area of the shell, you can also remove quite a lot of that graphite and then blend towards. Okay, so I've got quite a lot of tone, so to speak, on my blender already, and that's helping me to sort of push that across. This time I'm going to do this blending a little bit more linear, because it starts to give me some of the ridges as well. And then I'm just going to lighten this off a little bit more here, because it's actually a little bit too dark, and then find that edge again. Okay, so working with tonal values is about understanding or noticing where the light is at its heaviest, where the shadow is at its deepest to where the light is at its brightest. And you have to accentuate ever so slightly in order to sort of make this work on the page, okay? So I'm going to work my way through. Maybe I'll use this shell that I've already sort of got half of the tone down onto. But if I was doing that on this shell here, then I just take my pencil on its side like this. I'm going to follow that curve ever so slightly with the way that I run my pencil across. And so it would be dark here, and it would be dark here closest to that swirl, and then it would sort of lighten up as it gets towards the next edge. So again, we'd be blending directionally towards that lightest edge, and we may not even get all the way to the edge before we leave space for that highlight to come in. So sort of thought, oh yeah, one episode we'll just do some snails and then we'll do some slugs, and I always think that I can quickly whiz through these subjects, but actually I think we're going to slow it down for this cycle and for cycle 2 and really take our time with some of this initial observation and recording, and maybe we won't do a watercolour study or anything like that of our snails until cycle 2. We'll have to see how much time we have left. And I will try and include some slugs as well, but just to say that slugs are literally just snails that have embodied their shell, in fact. So they definitely are related to snails in that way. And so once we've learned about snails, it should make it a lot easier for us to learn about slugs, which I'm sure you can't wait. I'm sure you can't wait to learn about slugs. I don't think they're the most popular subject. Can't find a single tutorial on the internet about drawing slugs. No surprises there. But I am a slug lover, even though they're eating my broad beans. I am still a slug lover. I see the benefit of them. I try and love all creatures, regardless. I certainly won't be mutilating slugs in the way that I have heard even some members of my own family speak of slugs. That's not for me. So a nice, easy way to do it is to just work off that spiral that you've already created, add a little bit of tone using the side of your pencil, and then push out towards the highlight, okay? And that should give you something that actually looks pretty effective quite quickly, okay? And then we'll talk about sort of finer details in the next bit. But I just want you to work your way through. You can try both techniques. You can try putting a ground down, and actually it's much quicker for those of you that are a little less patient. But you do need to remember that you need to lift off the highlight if you're doing this one, and really noticing where the light is as well, because for me the light is coming from this direction. I've got a lovely highlight you can see there, but also this area is always lighter than this area. And if you can't see that properly, do have a look at the pictures on the resources, because some people find it hard to see or to put that sort of lens of tone down when it comes to seeing those full tonal values. So I'll just finish these ones off camera. Then I'll come back and talk to you about that last layer of detail, which is a sort of tone and texture, I suppose, because they sort of blend into one another. Okay, so just have a little practice, a little play with that, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, just one last thing to say on tone, which is, do you remember at the end of that tutorial I put in a hard edge here, and I've actually taken it away again, because if you look at this, there is no hard edge. There is a little bit of a darker tone there, which is where we see the pigmentation on the shell. But actually we don't need a hard edge. All we need is to sort of push our tone, if you like, or we can draw with what's left on the pencil here to push our tone up to that edge. All right, so a hard edge is not required. We can just have a nice soft edge like that and still be able to see the shell well. And yeah, do have a look at my annotation for that little tonal exercise. The last thing that we need to do now is add some finer details. If we look really closely at this shell, and I'm talking really closely here, you can see, or you can feel, which I like to do, lots of little grooves. So lots of little tiny shadows, in fact, in the shell, in that texture as it sort of grows its way out. You can also see little darker areas of pigmentation. So we've already added quite a lot of tonal value there, but we could also then just observe a little bit more closely some of the patterns. So if I just start to rub my pencil, and I'm going to press quite heavily here, side to side, because these shapes are not linear, then I can start to find some of that sort of tone of the pigmentation on the shell, okay? I want to build that up first. So I'm going to press a little bit harder here, for example, and pull the pattern out. And I'm using the side of the pencil because it just gives me a little bit more of a sort of softness, because they're quite patchy, these. But I'm pressing quite hard to make those quite obvious in those areas. So this is sort of still sitting underneath. And I'm just pulling out where I can see. My 40-year-old eyes can see some bits, and some bits are sort of sitting in shadow anyway. But wherever we can, as I was saying at the beginning, the closer observation that we can create of what we're seeing on that shell. This is a bit chunkier now than the tonal values, and the more realistic this little guy, or this little study of this little guy, is going to look. So something like that, okay? And then the final layer is to add some line work. So here we'll be using the end of the pencil, nice and sharp, and we'll be curving that with the shape of the shell. So that's going to look like this. Over the top. Sitting nice and proud over that lovely tonal base that we have laid. This doesn't have to be everywhere. You can just sort of hint at it in places, but it's really, really nice to add it. Like the icing on the cake of this little snail shell study. And I've got to really think about that so it doesn't come out as snail study. Gotta really think about what I'm saying. Okay, so just the last little layer of observation, just to show the overall shape of the shell. And if I curve these lines, that's really accentuating that shape. Just noticing as well that that curve changes and sort of starts off like this, and then the angle changes as we go around. So once it gets to the back, it's sort of bending around. And although you may not even think that these lines show up that well, our eyes, our brains really pick up on these subtle cues, on this subtle information. Notice how I'm using finger marks now. So wrist is still, but I'm using the fingers just to get those little short curvy shapes. So much easier with the fingers. You can do it with the wrist as well, but you're going to get a slightly larger shape. So just little finger marks here. Just that awareness of how our bodies are helping us to create these studies, I think, is really important. Understanding what our bodies are doing when we're drawing can be really, really helpful in improving our drawing technique. It's sort of like yoga. It's like, knowing where your body is, what it's doing, and helping that to align with what's happening in your mind. I'm just adding a little bit of extra subtle tone here, just because I took away that harsh edge. And you can you see that little swirl of tone? Sorry, using the word tone too much. But you can see that little swirl of pigmentation is what I meant to say, which really makes this little study come alive. So I hope you've enjoyed that little reminder, that little refresher on how to work with tone to create a study of a snail shell. And you've got a couple of different ways to do that. And again, the option is always there with Sketchbook Club to either just take what I'm offering and do that and let that be enough. Or if you want to extend, develop your practice, then take that and have a go at your side study of your shell, or have a go at your studies from different angles and really get an understanding, sort of deepen your learning. This journey is your own. I always provide the starting points, and then how much time and energy you then commit after that is entirely up to you, but you may find yourself getting sucked in to these snail studies and really enjoying them. So I am going to touch on the body now of the snail and think about how we can apply some of those principles that we've just learned with the shell to the texture of the body and the eyes and all those kind of parts. So that is coming right up, okay? Okay, my loves, so just coming back to our sketchbooks for this last little exercise of this episode. Just wanted to cover the full spectrum of sort of tonal studies of snails. And I'm working from this image here because it gives us the opportunity to look at that sort of tilted shell that I was talking to you about in the earlier part of the cycle. So I'm going to do a real quick sketch just of the shell and then of the snail's body for you, and then we're just going to work into it with tone just to address some of the textural elements as well of this snail, because it's quite interesting, but I'll go into it in a minute. So to begin with, I just want to get that loose sketching again, just to show you how things translate into the sketchbook. And then we're looking at quite a different angle here as we start to sort of cut away, so we might actually need some further ellipses over this side. Maybe slightly adjust the angle so it's a little bit more like an oval shape for these, just for this edge here and then this edge here where we've got sort of the shell sort of coming out towards the side. So a series of little soft circles there just to find that shape. And then as I start to carve in, and I will be quick with this because I know we've done this before. As we start to carve in, we find the top, that area that I kept talking to you about, where the mantle is. Still nerding up on my snail terminology. So that edge of the shell there just comes up to the edge of the snail's body and then sort of wiggles in a little bit here before we find the body of the snail. And then we've just got to come back and sort of reaffirm or more confidently build those lines. So I can find a little curve here at the top of the shell, a little one here, and then just that tiny little nubbin on the end there. So we're just going to establish those. If you want to complete the tonal study of this, you're more than welcome to, of the shell that is. We've already covered it once, so I'm not going to cover it again, but I will finish mine off obviously as a sample for you. So just finding those shapes and getting a sense of that angle of the shell when the snail is sort of moving along. So this area becomes quite wide here because we're looking at it from a slightly different angle. Okay, so just establishing those shapes to begin with, and then we're going to sketch the snail itself as well here. So we can see it sort of comes up from here at an angle, and you can check angles. So you can lift your pencil, make a mark, and then check over. You can also check length as well with your pencil. So if I put the tip of my pencil here at the edge of the shell, and I put my finger roughly where that edge ends, then I'm almost there with the correct length and angle there. Okay, and then for the bottom bit, it gets a little bit confusing on the eyes because this section tends to be a lot more prominent where there's the tone, but there is an extra little area under there where it's a little bit lighter as well. So let's see if we can find that. So I'm going to start by just finding the shapes of those antennae. You notice I just did a little ellipse just to help me find that more circular shape coming off of this antennae here, or the ocular tentacle, as I can see from my research. And again, a little circle and just a little dot in the middle for the eye. It does look a bit cartoony at first, but once you start to work into it, it'll look a lot better. So I can see the front of the snail's sort of face. Don't know if that's the right terminology, sort of coming off here. And again, just checking my angles. This is all good sketching technique. And I might actually put in just like a little ellipse just to soften off that shape to find the edge of that. And then we're going to come back and work our way back, trying to pay attention to the width there as well. So again, we can measure and just check. So sometimes the eyes play tricks on us with this, and we just need to check that what we're putting down is exactly what we're seeing. And then in terms of the back of the snail, it's sort of, because of the angle, it sort of peters off quite early. So something like that. It's not perfect, it's just a sketch. Let's get the other antenna in. Antenna. Gotta get that right. Little circle and just a little dot for now. We'll add tone to that, so don't worry. And then let's pull out these. I'm only being able to say this because I can see my snail anatomy above me, but let's pull out the olfactory tentacles, shall we? So there's one here. I will have to look up olfactory. I don't know what it means, but I'm sure it has a particular purpose to it. There we go. Okay, so snail comes down here. Here we can just sort of see a lot of strange gubbins. That's sort of like the bit of the body of the snail. And then we've got sort of a little tonal guideline here that we need to adhere to, where the body of the snail gets a little bit lighter in that area. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly tidy up that drawing and then we'll talk tone. But I'm aware that I'm running out of time for this cycle, so I'll be as quick as possible. I'm just going to get rid of any extra marks so that we can see this image nice and clearly, and then we'll talk about the tone of the snail itself, or the sort of body of the snail. He's looking quite funny now with his little goggly eyes. Okay, so just pause for a second and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've just tidied up the drawing, got rid of any extra lines because they can sort of be a little bit confusing when it comes to the next part of this. So things like the ocular tentacles, these can be done quite simply. My recommendation would be to add a little bit of tone just using the side of your pencil just to the base of those, and then to use your blender to pull that tone up because it's quite subtle. And we don't want to lose that dot in the eye. So just blend that off. That should work really, really nicely. And you can pull that tone up. So this is where these blenders are really, really helpful for sort of real intentional adding of tone. Okay, and I'll add a little bit around the eye, but not too much because I actually want that to stay fairly light. So it's a bit more of a delicate dance when it comes to this stuff, and I'm actually going to add a little bit more tone around the base of that tentacle just to sort of blend it off a little bit. Now, if I had a tiny rubber, then I'd probably pull that up against the edge of there just to add a little bit more of a highlight to that. But I don't have the luxury of that today. And in fact, with this blender, you could then start to find some of that texture on the top of the head just by pulling out these small shapes and leaving gaps in between. You can always accentuate afterwards, but it's good to start light with tone and gradually work your way darker. So then you'll see this area is a lot darker, this area is a lot lighter, then it gets a lot darker, then it gets a lot lighter again. So for the lightest version of that tone, I'd probably just put some tone down over here or put some pencil down over here, pick up from that and use that to gradually add a little bit of tone to that lightest area, because I think that's probably the lightest I can go, is just by picking small amounts like this and adding them to that area. This is not going to be an absolutely perfect study, but it's definitely a worthwhile investigation for our sketchbook. So that's my lightest tone. Everything after that needs to be either darker or lighter. Now this area right in the middle, I can do the same thing. And instead of so what we're going to do is we're going to have all these little dots, if you can see here, and then there's going to be darker tone around them. So in a way, you could, on these lighter areas, just pick out those shapes like I was doing before, just with what's on your blender, and start to find some of those shapes, some of that texture. And then if you feel like it needs accentuating a little bit, you can darken it a little bit with your pencil. But, you know, we don't want to go too heavy here. And probably a little tortillon would be better for this than these blenders that I've got here. They're a little bit chunky, but we'll work with that. And then in the darker areas, we can just be a little bit more pronounced with that. So we're still, in a way, you might want to just sort of methodically draw out those shapes that we're seeing first. And they are sort of odd, uneven shapes. So we're finding all the light areas first.
This is the hardest way to do this, by the way, I think, but it's a really good observation. But when we get into cycle 2, we'll do a really quick and satisfying version of this. But this is probably the most technical part, is actually the snail's body, because of all of this texture and this sort of change in tone that's happening. So all these little organic shapes, just popping those in to begin with. It's a nice little exercise in mindfulness, this. None of them need to be perfect. And then for these ones that are a little bit darker, even if you need the precision, just using the tip of your pencil to work your way around that and sort of darken the tone around those shapes. We're sort of working in reverse here. And just as we reach this edge, things actually get a lot darker, which is quite interesting. So this, again, this is a little exercise in mindfulness, an exercise in practicing some of the skills that we've already explored during this cycle. And I feel that these snails are really asking me to slow down. So that's why I am going to allow these snails to run into cycle 2 a little bit. There's a few more exercises that I'm really keen to do with you around snails with some watercolour and some inks. So I'm going to slow it down and do a little bit more in cycle 2 with you, okay? So I'm not going to do the whole of that, but hopefully you get the idea there, which is in the lighter areas, oops, keep doing that, don't I? In the lighter areas, just drawing out, just drawing out those shapes with a blender and then softly adding some tone in between. That can be done really, really nice and easily. Have a look at the resources, because I will add some guidance on that to the resources as well. And then in the darker areas, just going in quite heavily with your pencil, and you can blend off afterwards, but just make sure that you don't lose those little shapes that we've been finding, or that we've already found, by over blending in between them, if that makes sense. But we just want to make sure again that we've got that tonal variation between the lighter and the darker areas. So this is an exercise in translation. And then just here, you can see a little bit of texture running in to that lightest band. So again, just the side of the pencil, we can pull out those shapes. And that's, if we add those darker areas, it actually makes our lighter bits appear lighter. So when you look closely at this image, you will understand a little bit more what I'm talking about here. But use this image as a reference point, because it's got a really nice tonal guide for you. And then again, with your olfactory tentacles, if you can leave a little bit of light along the left-hand side, sorry. You leave a little bit of light around the left-hand side, they will appear a little bit more 3D, but they are absolutely tiny. So no pressure there, no pressure, but just making sure that you can see visibly, tonally, a difference between that top band, that top area, and that lower area. So we get that sort of tonal difference. And if you find it hard to see the tones, take a photo of this in black and white, take a photo of your drawing in black and white, and you should be able to identify those tones a lot easier. So I'm going to stop there because I don't want to waffle on too much and put you off in this first cycle of the season. But the invitation is there if you want to then go and apply the skills earlier on in the demonstration to also completing a tonal study of this snail shell slightly on its side, and you've got a really clear indication of light and dark there and shadow areas to guide you. So I'm going to stop there and I will meet you back in the next cycle. Make sure for the next cycle that you have got ideally some ink, but it's not super necessary, but make sure that you've got a basic pan palette of colours, because we'll definitely be diving into some watercolours, starting to think about how we can add some colours to a few different studies. And again, if you want to use other images on the resources, different snails, different shapes, and add those to your sketchbook, you are more than welcome to, okay? I just don't want to overload you too much in the first cycle. So I hope you've enjoyed this little introduction to tone and this introduction to Insectarium, starting with still land invertebrates, but they are mollusks, these ones, and we will get more into other insects as we move through the cycle or the cycles of the season. But this is just a nice, gentle, slow and mindful start to the season, looking at beautiful snails. Okay,